today we're going to be kicking off the first in our three-part series between Figma and DesignOps Assembly. My name is Kate, and our first talk today is going to be DesignOps, how to identify when you need it. Already introduced myself, brand new DesignOps lead over at Figma, and today I am joined by the awesome Taylor and Adam. I would love to kick it over to Taylor first to do an intro, and then after that, we're going to go right into our fireside chat. So Taylor and Adam, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I just saw someone from my team say hello. Hi, Gia. My name is Taylor Oliva. Pronouns are she, her. I lead the design operations team over at Instacart. Thanks for having me, y'all. Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. And thank you, Kate, and thank you, Figma. My name's Adam Frey Pierce. I am a chief of staff over at Google. Pronouns are he, him. Also a partner over at the DesignOps Assembly. And just really, really excited to start off this series, especially with Taylor. This will be pretty good.
Yeah.
Should we just dive into it? You wanna?
Let's go. Let's just get into it.
Yeah. The hour will go by quickly. I figure for everyone who's on the call, maybe a good place to start is, not everyone knows what DesignOps is. Let's just kind of localize there. Taylor, why don't you just start off and share your worldview? What does DesignOps mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's like asking you to pick your favorite food or color or movie. It's not a very easy question to answer because I think in the time that I've been in this space, everywhere I go and everyone that I talk to and every company that I worked at, it's been a little bit different. So I think that's important for everyone to keep top of mind. But what I have noticed that the common thread is like at its core, design operations is everything that needs to happen in order to effectively enable a design organization to function and operate at its like peak optimal level, right? For designers to do the best work of their life, to have the highest amount of impact, to contribute to an amazing product or experience. There are a lot of things that have to happen behind the scenes in order for that to be done effectively and to keep the people who are doing that work happy. So anything that is not design, content, even research, right? That's design operations. But Adam, I also know like you through DesignOps Assembly, you've got like your perspective on this. Would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. I mean, I think you nailed it. Like the great thing that we're all finding ourselves in the middle of is that design is a craft. We've spent a lot of decades now talking about how can we make the craft of design better. And then as product design has started to become more and more adopted and respected by organizations, the craft is scaled, right? There's more designers here and there are more leaders that are creating space for us to actually tackle what you just said, right? Is let's look at design as a process. Let's look at our designers as what they are, which are humans, and how can we create the best environments for them to do their best work. And I think it all comes down to that. Just total +1 to what you're saying. And on that note, maybe let's kind of spin this off as to what this really looks like in practice. What are maybe some of the things that you're seeing at Instacart and other things that you're seeing now that we know what DesignOps is? What does that look like from the front lines?
Yeah, and I think to answer that question, I'm going to start by making a pretty key distinction that I think anyone getting into the space or anyone who's thinking about getting into the space or someone who already is and is like figuring out how to navigate scaling their team to keep top of mind. There's design ops as a practice, and then there's design ops the role. And your company, fun fact, folks, can have a design ops practice without having anyone have a design program manager title, design ops specialist, design ops manager. Like if your design managers are tracking down and managing vendors, if your research managers are trying to figure out the most effective way to recruit participants for your company's research, if the head of your organization is trying to figure out how to put together a team offsite for team bonding and getting people together, those are all facets of design operations, and you don't have to have someone dedicated to the role to be doing it. So like that's the practice side of it. The other side is the role. So having either a single person or hopefully a team that is dedicated solely to the purpose of maintaining, augmenting, and continuing to scale that practice. So thinking through all the facets that it takes to keep the organization running. More granularly, I think I gave a few examples of like things that your leaders could be doing. But I think design operations, again, it's going to be really tailored to your organization and their most immediate needs. And I know we're going to get into that in a second, Adam. But I think, everything from tooling and enablement to thinking about compliance to vendor management and your budget to work streams, like how do you collaborate with your cross-functional partners to ensure that like what you're doing collectively as a product development organization is really driving to successful outcomes. All of those things, you need a level of intentionality brought to how you think about those processes, and then eventually building iterative programs that can scale along with your organization to help make those things more effective long term. So I think those are just like a few big buckets of examples, but like those are all areas right now where my team is leaning in and thinking about things like, does our org have the best tools? Is our tooling suite concrete? And like, do all of our designers understand how to use them? Are we onboarding new people effectively? Like, how long is the ramp up from the time that we hire them to the time that, their teams expect them to hit the ground running and start making magic happen, right? Do people feel happy? Like, do they have a sense of community and culture, which we could spend a whole other 2 hours just talking about the pivot in the last couple of years to a remote first environment and the impact that's had not only on creating great work, but also feeling a sense of unity and community within your organization. And so those are all areas, again, most of my teams, I think on the line, they know like these are the things that we spend every day thinking about and trying to figure out how do we make it better? How do we make it more accessible? How do we make sure that our people are happy and set up for success?
Yeah, I love it. The core of everything that you said is, there's two things that I'm hearing. One is let's remember that all these things are kind of happening anyways. We might not use that label. We certainly used to not, right? I mean, I used to be a design process consultant. That's essentially design ops. I know the P word a lot of people are allergic to, but in reality, like there is a way to get from very start of an idea to the end to where we're actually shipping something. And for a long time, that's what we did. So the fact that, we might not be using this label, that's really important for people to hang on to. This stuff is happening. Sometimes the design manager, design director, design executive themselves are actually absorbing this responsibility if they don't have that team to do the other thing that you said, which I really love, which is the intentionality of it, right? Is like designing the actual organization and how it's going to be successful.
Exactly.
Can we talk a little bit, maybe to all the folks who are here without that, design ops leader specialist, the no design ops team? What tends to happen? And this is going to start to segue into, how to know when you actually need to hire this person. But can you paint that picture? Like, what does that look like when there is no specialist? And what are maybe some of the signals that people on the call should be looking for to, get in front of annual planning season, which is coming fast, and start to make that request?
Yeah, start building the business case for that headcount, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I can speak to my experience. So at the two companies where I've worked, where I've established the practice, I think one of the biggest indicators that resulted in leadership getting headcount to bring someone in or to hire me was the managers on the team, the management bench, were starting to feel the tension of, do I spend my time focusing on defining and helping my team to execute a concrete product roadmap and up-leveling my people, focusing on the professional development side of things? Or am I trying to go back and forth for many, many weeks with legal to get a tool onboarded and through procurement? Like, that's a very concrete example, but that's the one I love to use because every time I say that to managers, they're like, procurement process for tooling. And I'm like, yeah, no, I know.
Right.
And so I think like if your managers are really spending time, and again, this is like one of the biggest areas, it's not the only indicator. If your managers are spending time on anything other than up-leveling their people through helping them up-level their skills, their craft, their impact, their business acumen, and then by extension, setting them up to successfully execute on the roadmap, anything beyond that, like, yes, they should be thinking about their team's culture. They should be thinking about making sure their teams are working effectively, but they shouldn't be spending a ton of time building the processes or systems or tools that enable that, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest tipping points for a lot of companies is that heads of design start to hear from their managers regularly, like, I don't have time to manage my team and work with cross-functional partners and also execute on the roadmap and make sure everyone on my team is happy and build systems for enabling that. Like, it gets to be too much. And so that becomes one of the pivot points for a lot of leadership teams to say, like, hey, in some instances, like, we will even give up a designer headcount so you can go hire someone who can focus on this stuff for us full time. And then you bring in that person who starts to operate as that strategic operational partner and programmatic thinking partner to the management bench. Yeah. I think another example of this that I've seen is actually not so much at the management level, but it's actually at the IC level. So individual contributors who are finding themselves spending way more time outside of Figma than in it, that they are spending more time thinking about team bonding or like building design systems and communicating it out and thinking through like cross-functional workflows and setting up a PM, like a project management platform, or, you know, trying to get Mural or Miro installed, but they're not working within Figma. They're not spending a ton, like the ratios of how they're spending their time flips from like 80% design to 10% operations to the inverse. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, designers like these ICs realize really quickly, oh, I'm not actually designing. I'm not designing the product anymore. I'm designing the environment. That is another form of ops in practice. And so managers see that, and a lot of the times you'll see, that's why we have a lot of designers who become design ops people, because they're like, I actually really enjoy designing the thing that designs the thing. And managers will like move them into the role, or their managers will see that and say, we actually need you to go back to designing the product, but we're going to hire someone to come in and take all of that operational work off your plate, or work with you to like make it better. Yeah, so I think those are pretty common.
I love what you said there too about indicators, right? And like there's so many things I want to say as a quick note before I unpack the indicator thing and kind of the symptoms of what a team might look like without a design ops person, is that the design ops field largely is very new. It's fairly, it has much more ahead of it, hopefully, in terms of maturity and being able to like very consistently deliver value and what that looks like across enterprises everywhere. But right now, a lot of people are just kind of figuring it out because of a really great thing about designers is we typically really care about users and people, right? And it's almost like there's designing the design org is a very interesting design challenge in and of itself, and it also attracts a certain type of person. I found that there is a similarity to folks that are interested in exploring design management or design leadership, that they also had this kind of cadence where they might be exploring design ops work streams or doing some stuff on the side, to your point of maybe moving from working on pixels to actually working on the organization. So if I look back over the last few years, I've seen and met quite a few people that were really good at design, or even we're starting to explore design management. They popped over in design ops, and now we have quite a few ex-practitioners who are actually designing the org. It's really cool. Now, I kind of want to push us along, if that's okay. Some of the other symptoms that we can be looking for are probably things that, you know, resonate with a lot of folks. Burnout, a lot of like, let's call it like tooling whiplash or process whiplash, or you're working on one team, or maybe you're not in a full dedicated squad model and you have to pop to different product groups. And it's like, there's all sorts of different ways as to how people do kickoffs, and there's no standards of briefs. There's these things that clearly there's no, not to have everything super standardized, but at least consistent waypoints and expectations as behaviors and activities of those waypoints as they go on that design journey and that product journey. And ops can help there. For the folks that are on the call that maybe are just starting out, or they're starting to build that business case, like you said, to bring the ops person in, let's go ahead and do a hypothetical. Imagine it's day one at an ops gig. And I'm just really curious what if these folks are successful in their business case ask, and they get their head count, and maybe themselves are starting off on their first day. What are maybe some healthy habits that the new design ops leader or practitioner can take to kind of kick off the new ops function to set it up for success? And maybe go back to like your first day. I'm not sure how you want to approach the question, but what advice do you offer?
I love this one because I actually just, in partnership with y'all over at DesignOps Assembly, wrapped up the inaugural session of our Learning Labs cohort. I did an intro to design operations, and this was like the number one question I got from the folks in my cohort, was just like, Taylor, tell us like what we need to be thinking about, because if you get onto a team and you look around, very quickly it can go from like 0 to a million things that need to get done, that are on fire, that you have to address, and that everyone now realizes there's someone in the role. Please take this, please go fix this, please make magic happen immediately. So I think for me, there are a few like things that I've done in my last 2 roles that have been incredibly helpful. And someone actually already posted it in the chat. Shout out Immaculata, thank you. Listening tours. I cannot stress this enough. I think it goes a little against our internal hardwiring as like ops thinkers to not dive in and start solving problems immediately. I know at least for me it did and has, but your first month to even 90 days. So we think about often plans 30, 60, 90, putting together a roadmap of how to be successful in your first like quarter at a company. You should be spending most of your time in discovery. You should be spending most of your time talking to people. And here's why. You are designing people first programs. You are going to be designing people first fixes, processes, resources. You have to understand what is most critical and what the people need, right? So you have to go have conversations. And for some teams, this might be like a couple dozen people. For some teams, this is like 50 to 100 people that you're going to have go conversations with, but that's where you have to start. So going to talk to, like when I started at Instacart, my first 90 days was I met with every single manager on the management bench so I could understand what's working, what's not, what's a pain point for you, what is the most immediate pressing thing. I met with every single IC within the organization, which at that point I think was like 60 people, carved out time with them, sat down, understood not only who they were and what they were working on, but like what they enjoyed about the existing organization, and then what was making their lives difficult. Like what could we fix to improve their experience as part of the Instacart design org. And side note, when you're doing this, you're also building rapport. A lot of times when you're design ops hire number 1, you're going to be joining an org where some people might have worked with a design ops person in their past, but because, like you mentioned, Adam, the function is so nascent and so new, a lot of folks haven't. So there has to be a level of rapport and trust building that you're doing with every member of the organization in order to ensure that long-term, when you really start to get into the nuts and bolts of building out these programs, you already have buy-in. You have that culture connection with these humans that you're designing for, because you're going to need their help down the line. You can't do it by yourself. So there's an added like bonus that comes from like carving out the time to sit down and really get to know these people, especially, I cannot stress this enough, in a remote world. So listening tour with ICs, listening tour with managers, and then listening tour with all of the business units that the design organization works with. And this is a critical one that I think often like listening tours within your org totally makes sense, but go one step beyond that. Go talk to the people on HR, recruiting, IT, procurement, finance, your workplace experience team. You're going to need their help. You're going to be working with them regularly when you're in design operations, and you want to understand what programs or processes you have in place. How do I get a tool through procurement? Do we have a process for onboarding contractors? What does it look like to plan a team event? And how do we bring in the workplace team to coordinate that? And oh, by the way, finance, please tell me what my budget is, because I'm going to need to know if we have funds allocated for me to go do all of these things, or if I'm making things up on the fly. You have to have those conversations early and then start to uncover what's working and what's not, because they're going to be your critical business partners, the same way that a designer thinks is their PM and engineering lead as their critical partners. Your business partners are going to be critical for ops, because they're the folks who are going to help you keep this thing running. So listening tours, super important. I think one thing, and I'm gonna punt it back to you, Adam, because this is something I know you do regularly, that I absolutely love, is the idea of putting together starting to pull together a menu and or charter for your organization. And that is something that I'm still working on with my team. They're probably laughing on the other end of this call because they know like we're working slowly to develop it. But I know you've done this in actual practice. And so I think that's another thing that you can start to do and go to your managers and saying like, hey, based off of what we're seeing, here's what we can offer, or here is what I, individual team of one, can start to do. And then here's everything we can do in the future, assuming we scale our team. I don't know. You want to?
Yeah, for sure. I love what you're saying too. The listening tour is critical, right? Not just for an ops position, for really anybody. I hope that if you're just joining a team, whether as a designer, design leader, product manager, or design ops person, that you're given the time to just go and do all the things that you're talking about, building those relationships with the people that you're servicing, as well as your critical stakeholders and partners. Absolutely. To kind of continue on that idea, to what you're pointing at, is what I like to do is I've taken this from other people, so this is not an original idea. I've watched Brennan's talk at Rosenfeld. I think it was back in like 2018 is when I had first learned about this idea of centralizing everything into a menu, which is context is kind of a broader artifact that a lot of people call charter. Some people call it a strategic plan, whatever it is. It's a document that you can kind of take all that feedback and put it into to do a very simple thing, which is to say, here's what we are doing, and here's maybe what we're not doing. And that's the entire point, is right?
Yep.
Is to be able to take all this feedback. I like to start it in a whiteboard tool, just like a Fig Jam is perfect, especially if you already have Figma. Centralize all the learnings, and then you can kind of, with your leadership team, prioritize, say, here's some of the activity, here's the business case as to why I'm here, right? Why was I hired? It was probably to solve these things. Also, fresh data, either from satisfaction surveys or whatever tools that you really have from a data standpoint, to say, here's what we can stand on. Here's the evidence outside of my listening tour that said that these were the top opportunity areas, whether it's on the practice side of the overall craft, how can we kind of fine tune that as the organization, or on the organization operations side, how can we kind of help the organizational health of the design practice itself just be stronger, and then take our inputs from our listening tour and put it all together into the thing at the center of the charter, which is the menu, to say, here's going to be the actual activities that we're going to be investing in. And then you can put that into a roadmap. And with it, you can actually create your very simple XYZ. Again, this is just what I like to do is I like to say, if we do X, we will accomplish Y, and it will cost us Z. And from that, it's a very clear conversation with our leaders as far as impact. And then they can kind of jump in and figure out how to reprioritize that menu, right? Because there's going to be more asks coming our way. Pretty much every single environment that I've seen, even at the largest scale, think of like a Meta or a Google, there's more requests than what we have resources to support, regardless of how big the team is. So especially if it's a team of one, you're going to be asked to do everything. You could potentially get into
almost immediately.
Right.
Almost immediately. Sorry to cut you off. Just like,
no, please.
This is something that is the other big thing. And I think we're going to talk about like pitfalls, right? Like where design ops folks can start to, or even orgs can start to make like mistakes. I think this is one of the big ones, is this idea of, you have someone joining your team in a design operations role. All of our problems are solved. Like, this person is going to do everything, and they're going to make it beautiful and effective, and it's going to fall within our budget, and like, it's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think in part, like in tandem with doing that listening tour, it's also sitting down with your design leadership bench. So if they have a design management forum, like weekly meeting, you should be in it. Design ops hire number one should be in the room. And I understand like they talk about management things, but that's always been the case for me. I've been in the room because I can sit down and say, okay, from an operational lens, here's how you need to be thinking about that. Oh, by the way, we can't prioritize that right now, or prioritizing that means trade-offs with something else. But I think that idea of like a single point of like, all of our problems are solved is one of just the biggest pitfalls that we can fall into. So setting really clear, I won't even say like boundaries with management around like, look, I understand you hired me to do all of these things. I know what the job description says, and I promise I'm going to get to that. But in order for me to do that successfully, I can't just anchor all of my assumptions around where I need to lean in immediately from what I'm hearing from the management team, because the org, it goes beyond management. It's everyone. I need to go hear from all of these other people what is working and what isn't. Because fun fact, the managers are only one perspective. They only have one lens. It turns out managers think something's a pain point, but it doesn't come up at all for the ICs. And that's the bulk of the org. So then you can help paint and this goes into, we start to get into like ops being a very strategic partner on how the org is operating and being able to uncover areas that maybe the management bench doesn't have a lens into, and saying, hey, I know you guys said X was a priority, but to your point, Adam, like I've done this synthesis and analysis of all of my listening tour interviews. I've also looked at the most recent like org engagement survey and cross-reference. So now you have qualitative versus quantitative data, and you can like assess, right? You start to become like a little researcher within the org too. It's very meta. And say like, hey, I know we thought X was a problem, but we actually need to go spend time on culture. Like people are incredibly unhappy. Why is that important? Well, hiring is difficult. It's an investment for both managers and the rest of the org and recruiting. So let's focus on retaining the people we have. Let's make sure they're happy so they want to stick around. And then figuring out, we're going to do X first, we're going to do Y next, we're going to do, and sequencing how you tackle it, because you're not going to do it all overnight. It's going to take a longer term strategy, a longer term plan. So you start to paint that picture for your management team around how you can do it. And then at some point, because you set those boundaries, you can also say like, hey, this very quickly went from being a one person can start to uncover and set a strategy to here's how many people we're going to need in order to make these menu items happen. We need to go hire them, right? So then inherently with putting together this strategy for the org, you're also building a business case to scale the operations practice. And I think that's another area where like, if you do it right, you can do it at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't have to prove impact in like necessarily at the gate in order to show like, hey, here's how we're going to need to scale the team in order to drive more work, more programs, more enablement across the org. So clearly have a lot of thoughts about this.
These are good thoughts. I love it. Yeah. No, I love too that you're not just saying, hey, make the ritual about alignment on prioritization. You also are starting to embed in expectations with your leadership team, if I'm hearing you correct, as to how you're going to be revisiting evaluation and then scale, to your point. And you can start kind of creating these, you can enter in these frameworks early. It doesn't need to wait. And also for anyone that's on the call, this isn't necessarily something that had to happen day one. If you missed it, you're still fine, right? You can start all this stuff literally tomorrow, or you can build it into potentially in the next quarter if you're in total reactive mode. But the entire point is if I'm hearing this correctly, is make sure that you don't get stuck in a perpetual state of reaction. And everything that we're talking about is really just like a way to strategically approach how to essentially get more value out from the ops function to the rest of the organization. So I love what you're saying. Can we kind of move on to talk about something that you had mentioned, which is what are some of the lurking pitfalls and trapdoors to be aware of? This is not your first day at Instacart. I would love to hear some of the lessons that you've learned along the way. It's like, what has gotten in the way from you to potentially be able to do what we were just talking about, which is get the most amount of value that you can out to the org.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest ones that I mentioned was just becoming kind of like, and I almost hate this term, but like the dumping ground for all the work that no one wants to do across the organization. Because again, you're going to have, when you're joining an org, you're going to have a mixed bag of people who have either worked with design operations before or they haven't. And everyone who has worked with design operations in a very different capacity. Because again, y'all, I cannot stress this enough. How design operations operates, functions, what they do, your actual roles, even your titles. It's going to be very specific to the company that you're working at. Like it's going to depend on the org's maturity. It's going to depend on the company's maturity. It's going to depend on funding. It's going to depend on like the department, the design department itself, and like what their most pressing needs are. So like there's no one size fits all, but I think something that the pitfall that is in common is very quickly it turns into this excitement can then segue of the org members can segue into, oh, we now have someone who can go handle this thing that like no one has wanted to touch, but it kind of needs to get done. And it's like, well, is that a design ops like scoped area? Like, and if
Right.
it is that critical based off of this roadmap or this listening tour roadmap that we just put together? Like, why? That's going to be a really key thing to lead with, y'all. It's like, why is it critical for us to tackle this? And then why is it critical for design operations to tackle this? Like, not saying that we're not going to, but again, it gets into setting up like really clear guidelines around how you want to operate and what you want to take on. We have on our team, I can tell you, like, we do quarterly like rolling planning within design operations. We actually just switched to like semi-annual planning to align with our broader product org. But we keep a backlog of things that come through from org members who are like, hey, we want to do this, or we think this is a good idea. And it's like, well, if you guys want to go spin it up, like, we're here to provide like consulting level services, but like, we can't run point on that right now because we have this whole roadmap of priorities that we've already aligned on. And, you know, some folks will be like, yep, I'll do it. And then some folks are like, no, this is really an area that ops should drive. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine, but we're going to put it on our roadmap or on our backlog, and then we'll come back to it for the next planning cycle, and we'll assess it against everything else that we need to do and determine if it's a priority. So, yeah, this idea of like just saying yes to everything. And I will admit, like, even our team, you know, when I got started at Instacart, because we were very hungry to prove our value and our impact, was like, yes, we'll do this. Yes, we'll do this. Yes, we'll do this. And at some point we looked around and we were like, wait, okay, hang on. There's no focus. We're doing too much, like, and we can't do it well if we're doing too much. And things start to fall through the cracks and things start to break. And you're like, I can't do a million things at once. At that point when we started, I think it was, there were 3 of us. It was myself and 2 design program managers who are both still on my team. And I just saw Ella's post, like, even if we wanted to, like, even if we were excited to do these things, these ideas, these programs that people were talking about, we were just like, there are things we have to do to keep the lights on for the organization. Like, there are non-negotiable programs, processes, workflows that design ops is responsible for that we have to support. We have to onboard humans. We have to handle our budget. We have to handle procurement and make sure all of our tools are compliant and make sure all of you have access to them. Like, we have to make sure that our forums and our comms and our rituals are all consistent. Like, there's a baseline of things that we have to get done. So as much as we want to say yes to everything, it is not possible. So for anyone out there who's in this role, and this is very common, y'all, it's like not a once in a while thing. It's pretty much everyone I talk to who starts as team of one in design ops. Like, it's okay to say no. It's okay to go to your leadership team and say, like, look, it's just me. And I know you want to do all of these things and I want to do them too, but let's put together a plan. And a plan is not like over the course of a couple months. A plan is over the course of quarters or years in order to get from where we are today to this point. Like, if this is where we're going, let's map out how we get there over the course of longer periods of time. And I think that can be very tricky. I think there's a metric that I wanted to share with y'all. You know, when establishing, like, there's an annual report that gets put together, which if folks on the line haven't taken a look at it and are figuring out how to build a business case for design operations, I encourage you to. I think Kate's going to include it in the resources we send out for today, but it's the state of design ops annual report. In last year's report, I went back and I looked at the numbers. Less than 15% of people who answered the survey stated that they stood up their design ops practice in less than a year. Over 60% of the people who responded to the survey reported it taking somewhere between 1 to 5 years to establish their design ops team. Now, there's a lot of information that we can unpack there, but I think it's fair to say, and having experienced this firsthand, I can attest to it, it takes time. It takes time, which, Adam, I don't know if you have more you want to add, but I'm about to drop the mic with my hot take if we're at that point, which is, fun fact, folks, you should be making your first design ops hire in your first 20 people within your design organization. 20, 10, 10. And for a lot of folks, especially managers or people who've been in the industry for a while, they're going to say, that's insane. Like, why would you hire someone that early? The team is so small at that point. Like, we aren't going to use that headcount. We need to allocate that headcount to another designer or a researcher or a content designer. I'm like, hear me out. Here's the thing. You ready? If it's true that it takes a design ops practice on average somewhere between 1 to 4 or 5 years to establish, and it's safe to assume that on average, most companies are waiting till hire 40, 50, even 60 to bring their first design ops person in. Sorry, 20 designers, y'all. That was a great question, Maddie. 20 designers within your design org. 20 designers, content strategists, researchers, like depending on the structure of your org, but like employee number 20 should be your design ops hire. So assuming that it takes 1 to 5 years, right? And assuming most people are bringing their design ops person in around like 50, hire 60, which I think is pretty average. That's when I was hired at both my teams. That's okay, but here's the thing. I can attest to this. The first 18 months of us building up the practice at Instacart was primarily focused on organizational programmatic debt. We had to go back and look at, okay, and this is the best example I can give, our tooling suite. Now, I was told, can't share the number, but I will say this. 40, 50 designers, the department had been around for a handful of years since the beginning of the company, way too many tools, like triple digit number of tools. Not okay. And fun fact, none of them had gone through procurement. Some were being charged to personal credit cards, some were being charged to the team credit cards, some were individual license. So why do I use this as the example as to why you should bring in the design ops person early? Well, first of all, it took us 18 months. We are just now crossing the finish line of like bookending this chapter of our existence as a team. And we're so excited about it because we had to go back. We had to audit the tooling suite. We had to sit down with everyone and understand what they were using. Different teams, right? When we talk about silos, Adam, different teams using different tools, which means in processes that are not consistent, right? With working with people, our cross-functional partners, had not gone through procurement, had not gone through our vendor security system. It's a compliance problem because especially now with data privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA, no tracking mechanism for PII in these systems to ensure that we're compliant. It's a financial issue. There's a spend cost associated with this because we're spending money left and right on duplicative tools and they're inconsistent. And we haven't invested, in some cases, we hadn't invested in the enterprise tier. So there's a whole single sign-on component. So like, it actually is one of those things that touches every single piece or part of where design ops should be focusing. Effective enablement, compliance, access and onboarding, financial and budgetary considerations. Had we brought in someone early on who could sit down and say, okay, we know we're going to 2x the design org over the next 2 years. We need to think about what that means for our tooling suite and identify our design tool, our whiteboarding tool, our prototyping tool, our collaboration suite, our documentation and resource management platform. All of those things need to be identified. And then we need to think about how we're going to scale them as we bring new people in. Instead of saying, we're going to go and procure like 5 or 6 different prototyping tools because everyone wants to use their own favorite version. And this is a common thread with everyone I talk to in design ops. They're like, oh, tooling, like my heart is sad. But it's one of those things that's like, yes, but it's a case study for why bringing someone in early to just think about this, right, is so critical. So I can, again, yes, Vanessa, we can move on to Q&A because I'm sure people have a lot of questions, but I just think if you bring someone in early who can think about how to design the organization, how they're going to operate, what tools they're going to use, how they're going to connect, it will not only ensure that you're doing it from a good starting point, but that the first person you bring in isn't spending their first 18 months to 2 years on addressing, like looking back to address work. They're actually looking forward. They're looking at what comes next and where the team is going to go. Because that's where they should be, is looking forward and thinking about how the org gets better over time. So anyways, I don't know if that was helpful, but that's perfect. Kind of
it was perfect. Yeah, I think what we're hearing is start early, bring in that individual or individuals much earlier than you might anticipate. And also for everyone, you'll see in the State of Design Ops report, the ratios are all over the board. There is no magic number, but to Taylor's point earlier, is better. And we are starting to see that the teams that generally are having a more healthy, let's call it a chapter at their company, they tend to be inheriting smaller teams, so that then they can actually apply some systems design to the practice itself, so that it's set up for scale rather than just being in reactive mode. Yeah, let's move on to Q&A, and then I know we have announcements at the end in case anyone is gonna jump. There was a lot of questions around the where are we like pulling these insights from. It's all from the Learning Labs. Taylor is a teacher, and I believe that she's going to continue to teach, but she's teaching the new to Design Ops cohorts. So if you want to spend more time with her, that's where. All right, let's go into Q&A. Kate, do you mind facilitating, or would you like me to read them?
Oh, absolutely. I am here to facilitate. And before we move into that, just want to say, Taylor and Adam, that was super incredible. I think everything you said was resonating so much with everyone in the chat, and also resonated with me, right? You know, I only started at Figma a couple of months ago, and I think these tips are just so valuable. So thank you so much. Everyone, feel free to use the Q&A feature. I've already sort of taken stock of some questions coming up. One question is from Aaron that I really love, and Aaron says, as a design manager, developing more empathy for our new design ops hire, how should we think about prioritization of design ops efforts? And how can the management bench help provide air coverage on what's been worked on versus not?
Oh man, that's such a thoughtful question. I think there's a few different ways I could answer this, but I think in my experience, managers who are open and willing, first of all, yes, give me all the information. Like, don't hold back. As much as you feel comfortable, tell me, you know, when we're sitting down to do that listening tour, if I got to schedule more time with you, I will, but like, tell me what you know. Tell me what's true for your team, what's working, what's not, like, give it to me all. And then together we can sit down and start to work through, like, what are the most pressing issues for us to address, or areas for us to address for your team. Is it tooling? Is it culture and connection? Is it tracking projects? Is it how you run your crits? Is it how you store, you know, resources and information for your team? Is it how you socialize your work? Like, let's work through that together. I think the best working relationships that I have had with managers in my experience in design operations are those who are super open to sharing their experience today, who are super open to letting things go that they don't need to be doing. Like, I've had managers who are like, how, you know, I want to hold on to vendor management because they enjoy doing it or they're good at it. And it's like, yeah, but like, let's think about it this way. I can't help up level your designers and craft as well as you can, but I can go streamline how we onboard vendors to make it easier for you. Like, let me take that off your plate. Let me remove that headache from your list of to-dos so that you can go focus on the things that only you can do. I think those are the relationships that have been the most successful in working with managers, like those who want to share, those who are willing to let go of things that we can like take on and make better. And then the last area is those managers who really start to act as like evangelists of design operations to their teams, right? So if we send out an event, managers cross-posting to their team channels, if we send out new resources or a new process that we want everyone to adhere to, or new training that people have to take, managers saying like, hey team, ops is launching this, like be sure to complete it. Because I think when we start to get into this cadence of like managers cascading the information and cascading the resources, it just helps everything move along quicker, right? Ops can spend less time trying to track people down versus to get them to do things versus spending time on actually building new things. Adam, anything to?
No, just is a plus to that is calibrating on roles within the context of those work streams and programs is really important. There's just because there's an ops specialist here now doesn't necessarily mean that design leadership or design managers or a guild or a community practice doesn't still have a part. If not, it's not still driving a component of some of that existing work. Something I'd like to borrow. she probably wouldn't appreciate if I called her out by name, but there is a brilliant design ops leader that offered there was like this previous head of design ops roundtable group that we were part of. And what she had recommended is going to each portfolio group, not only with the menu to calibrate on some of the activities that are happening that was previously mentored and agreed upon with leadership, but to also then offer a whole different, like an extra lens as to how to view that menu by calibrating with some of those managers on what the expectation was of the relationship between ops and that focus area. It was on a 4-point scale where they basically would say, how can this menu best support your team or vice versa? And is our role as one of 4 different types of roles? Are we doing white glove delivery of this particular behavior? Are we doing an embedded model? And this is really clear for like design program management, right? In the actual squad itself. But are we doing white glove? Are we doing embedded? Are we doing consultative? Or are we doing self-service support? And we found that with that lens to the menu, you can actually kind of customize how that ends up manifesting across the entire organization at the manager or portfolio director level, which is really, really helpful. We don't have a ton of time to dive into this. I don't even know if there's a blog written on this, but that's the general idea, is just calibrating on roles and expectations of all the existing work streams that are out there.
Yeah. Sounds like a really great topic for a blog post. And I love Claire wrote in the chat, top-down directive, which I think is such a great phrase to keep in mind when we're thinking about this question. There's a couple questions in the chat that are tied together around design systems that I'm really curious to hear y'all's take on. So Chuck said, what's the difference between design systems and design ops, and can the roles coexist? And then Hallie relatedly said, I'm curious to hear your perspectives on how something like a team for design systems fits into the design ops strategy.
Yeah. Do you mind if I take a crack at it?
Yeah, go for it, Adam.
Yeah. So again, it's early days. So this looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different teams. Previously, when I was at Docusign, we had a full different design systems team versus the design ops team. And we were really just much more, let's take a decision-making framework. Let's take RACI, right? We were really just a C and an I on the RACI. So we didn't actually touch design systems. I've seen that kind of is the exception to the rule. It seems like generally like design systems and design ops teams are actually closely embedded and integrated. So like if you want to unpack what those are, design systems is to help us kind of create standard experiences in the product itself. And design operations does play a role in helping the actual work happen between teams and socializing, let's say with like process intake and stuff like that. But they are different functions. And I wouldn't necessarily say that one is a subset of the other. They're different. One is in product standardization. The other one has to more broadly do with optimizing the practice of design, more broadly. So this looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different teams. It kind of is hard to give a very specific answer. I would actually like to point people to 2 resources that are out there: the Design Ops Handbook and the Design Systems Handbook by Envision. They're just great calibrators in terms of if you're not familiar really with either practice, I would just start by learning a little bit more, and then you can go kind of study how different teams are doing it. Taylor, how does this actually look at Instacart though? How does the ops team?
Yeah, 100%. We have 2 teams. They're one of the other functions within the design org. We work very closely with them in terms of, supporting them, enabling them to do their work, and then socializing the work that they're doing, both within the org and more broadly. But in both of the roles that both of the companies where I've been in ops, design systems and design operations are both, I think of them as like partners in terms of better enablement to the rest of the design org, but in very different ways. And it involves a lot of collaboration between the 2. But I think you're right, Adam. It's going to really depend on how your organization is structured. Sometimes I see a lot of times design ops hires, number 1, come in to specifically be staffed to design systems. So it's a mixed bag. It's really going to depend. But I was going to +1 the resources you called out. Those are really good places to start if you're trying to figure out how to clearly delineate roles and responsibilities between those 2 practices.
Yeah, thank you. Kate, do we have time for another question, or should we go into announcements?
We do. We have time for one more question that I have queued up. And also thank you to Vanessa for dropping some of those resources in the chat that we just talked about. So I selfishly love these 2 next questions. I sort of actually come from a design background, coming into Figma as their first design ops hire. So Lillian and Catherine asked two really great questions. Lillian said, I've often been told that design ops is only for very senior VP level folks. What about newer designers who have some background in operations? What would a role look like for a junior to mid-level design ops person in a more established org? And then Catherine relatedly asked, just what skills do you need to be a design ops specialist? And I find those two questions like really inherently tied together.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can share my truth. I don't come from a design background. Prior to design operations, I was an executive assistant, and prior to that, I worked in recruiting operations, and prior to that, I've worked in consulting. The consistent thread throughout my career that kind of led to me loving design operations was this idea around like building effective people first focused processes and programs. So I think on the skill set side of the house, I think it's going to vary, but if you have experience in recruiting, if you have experience managing budgets, if you have experience thinking through how you structure information or project plans or tracking work or projects, if you have experience in like comms plans or putting together like go-to-market roadmaps, which I know sounds weird, but like we do our own version of go-to-market within the design org, like those are all applicable skills. And again, it's really figuring out if the skill set you have aligns with the immediate needs of the company that you're looking to like interview with or join. On the first question, I don't know if I think that you have to be particularly a senior leader to join and design, like be the first design ops hire. I actually think, again, it's going to depend on the company and the team itself. I will say for design ops hires, number one, a lot of the time, because the head of design and their management bench are really looking for someone to come in and go wide versus going deep. Someone who is, I found, more of a generalist who can pitch hit a lot across a lot of different areas and subject matter, like focal points within the org is probably going to be someone who's going to do really well, because you can pivot from helping them streamline their recruiting process to building out resources to managing the budget to putting together an offsite to, et cetera. So I think that generalist lens actually ends up being super helpful. Adam?
Yeah. I'll give like a 30-second answer. Total +1 to everything that Taylor said. I also don't come from like I get mistaken as a designer. I used to do graphic. I was such a terrible producer, right? So I found another niche where my skills were helpful. The other thing that I'd throw out there is I anticipate that there's gonna be more junior and let's call them like low or entry level roles that pop up as the field matures. But that's probably why it's been previously viewed that there's more senior folks, is because as the function was starting, where it worked were probably areas where people just had like a foundational understanding as to how change management works with an enterprise. And so the teams that didn't get crushed probably just understood they had more of a foundational understanding or potentially like years of experience to be able to lean on, to be able to like find ways to make quick wins, right? Which experience typically lends you. But I would just say like it is not, there's not like one road that leads to Oz at all. A lot of different people come from a ton of different backgrounds. I just dropped in a screenshot from our class where we just asked everybody, like, what do you think are the critical skills to succeed in this position? And this is what our cohort had come up with. So hopefully that's helpful for you. And then the last thing is I'll say is that context is everything. There's going to be certain ops teams that started specifically because they need to start up a design program management function, others for the tooling, mess, or others for other reasons entirely. So just keep that in mind, that like context is everything. What design ops looks like at a huge enterprise like Google is very different from like a startup down the street.
Amazing.
Yeah, +1.
Amazing. I think we're going to go into some closing thoughts before I sort of close us out. Adam, do you have any announcements you wanted to make?
Yeah. Just first off, a huge thank you to Figma. The learning labs that we do over in the DesignOps Assembly, this is like pretty much entirely made possible because, well, the people were demanding it, but also we had Figma as a partner. This is it's a 12-week cohort. We do them a few times a year. Right now we're in the middle of our summer cohort, but we'll be kicking off a fall cohort as well. Like I mentioned, Taylor teaches, I teach, as well as just like a bunch of other brilliant people. So if you want to, pair up with a tailor, check out Learning Labs. Thank you, Vanessa, for dropping that in the chat. And Figma's role in that is actually helping fund those that don't have professional development scholarships, professional development budgets, or necessarily the money. So with hope, Figma will continue to support the program, but they have created scholarships so that people can participate in this program. So a huge thank you to Figma. If you want to be part of this thing, join us, apply, and we'll open up a new session soon. Is a broader piece of context. This is all part of the DesignOps Assembly. It's a great community. It's free. Go ahead and check it out. I'll drop a link in the chat, but just go in there and you'll basically be able to find Taylor and I in the Slack right now. So hopefully we'll talk to you over there.
Thanks, Adam. Oh man, Taylor, Adam, thank you so much for doing this today. For anyone, if you missed any of the links we shared, have no fear. We're going to include them all in the recording and a follow-up email this week. And then I have some info on the screen to check out Figma live streams, including part 2 of this series with DesignOps Assembly. Head to figma.com/events. All of our streams are recorded. And even if you can't make it, register so you get that recording. And if you have any suggestions on topics, we're always available, community@figma.com. And that is a wrap, everyone. Hope to see you all at session 2 and hope you all have a good Wednesday.
Thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Okay. Thanks,
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.